Yes, friends, those of you who are here at the inaugural will have heard Dr. Easterine Kire already, but I'm very grateful that she's come back to our literature festival again. Um, Dr. Easterine, I have described her previously as a one-woman cultural renaissance, but she is a poet, short story writer, and novelist from Nagaland and Norway. She's written some absolutely amazing books. I recommend Naga Village Remembered and also Mari very much. This is an essential primer, which is exploring the tribes of Nagaland. And Dr. Easterine has a Goa connection. In the past, I have been able to offer a basket of our finest mangoes to her, and today I would like to offer her this treasure trove written by a friend of Goan mango cooking. So, Easterine, for you.
Thank you so much.
This connection between Goa and the Northeast is a very real one. It seemed when we first started, the Northeast states, of course, are complicatedly banded together. They're actually quite different. They each are very distinct. But the region is banded together in India, and it's pushed to what's called the periphery or the margins. And this is something that is also the case with Goa. And when we first started the Arts and Literature Festival, Damodar Mausa and I and the International Center, Dr. At that time with Nandini Sahai, the idea was to build it around this shared sense of being pushed to the margins. And over the years, it has become, I would say, not just something that is no longer questioned in any way, but it has become a kind of a truly joyous family reunion every year. And it's something that is of great meaning to our lives. And I'm so glad Dr. Easterine has been a part of this thinking for a long time. And I'm so glad that this time we also have Professor Kaustubh Deka of the Dibrugarh University. I've had an opportunity to spend time in Dibrugarh. Dibrugarh is very far away from Goa. Dibrugarh is closer to Vietnam, much closer to Vietnam or Cambodia or certainly obviously Burma or Bangladesh than Goa is. But Kaustubh is a wonderful scholar, one of India's best young scholars, if I may say so. And he is also a son-in-law of the Nagas and the same people who Eastern represents. So this is also a family reunion, Kaustubh. So with no further ado, please, Professor Kaustubh Deka and Easterine Kire, Dr. Easterine Kire. Big hand, please.
Thank you, Vivek, for that very wonderful note of introduction and for setting up this whole conversation. And good afternoon to all of you. And Easterine Kire does not need an introduction. Many of you, I think, already have attended the keynote lecture, and she was introduced, and she gave us really a very powerful kind of a speech and insights to think about. So what I will try to do in the course of maybe next 30 to 40 minutes, what we will try to do is that instead of kind of listing out name of books and different kind of accolades and different kind of background, what we'll try to do is that in the course of conversation, perhaps we will try to bring out, of course, some of the names and details, but more like her journey as a writer, as someone who has been kind of grappling with this very important set of issues for many years. And in fact, before this conversation, both of us were kind of sitting down and we are trying to kind of figure out like what will be a good way to go about, because someone like Easterine, Dr. Kire has in fact had so many interviews over the years. If you just look up, you will find n number of interviews in different formats, with magazines, and nowadays, of course, with podcasts and webinars. So at times it, of course, gets repetitive, and at times it gets very limiting also. So what we'll try to do today, perhaps, is that we'll try to begin with certain very basic sounding kind of, some fundamentals, and try to kind of unravel the complexities, you could say, or the interesting points from there. But first of all, ma'am, or maybe I can call you Dr. Kire, because Vivek mentioned also the personal connection. So there are so many ways to connect. the Naga background, the Angami life world, the world of a scholar writer. So there are so many ways to connect with her. So it becomes challenging at the same time becomes delightful. So that might keep changing in the conversation. You might see that our tone of conversation also might change in the course of half an hour, 40 minutes. But to begin with, I'll ask you a very, very simple or basic question. Maybe you are tired of answering it by now, but apologies for that. Is that, where do you come from? Like, it's very easy. You can say, come from Nagaland, you come from Kohima, we all know that. And where do you come from, and what kind of a place it was, back in the day, and how it has changed over the years? Maybe you can start with that, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you for that question, Kaustubh, and thank you the rest of you who don't mind delaying your lunch to listen to us. So let's have fun. I'm very proud of where I came from. It's a little town called Kohima.
You can put it closer.
Yeah. Kohima, it's a historical town because that's where the tide of the Second World War was stopped, that side of the world. And I haven't told you this, Kaustubh, but I was traveling in Germany at the airport in Berlin. The lady was going through my passport and she said, "Oh, you're from the Japanese town of Kohima." And I didn't know how to explain. This was an Indian passport. It's blue, it's economy. But, if you think back, she was right because the Japanese occupied Kohima for about 2 months, 2.5 months. So that's how grim the war was. And we have many war memories from 1944. And my pastor is still alive. He can still point out places where the Japanese camped in their village and where the captain was buried. So we continue to get Japanese visitors. Yeah.
So thank you so much for bringing it up, because it gives us a very interesting kind of introduction to your whole writing landscape, because most of the time, many of us, in fact, maybe in the audience, have heard of Kohima, Nagaland, mostly because of maybe extremes, either festivals, Hornbill Festival, colorful headgear, dances, etc., or conflicts. So either very romanticized that this land of beautiful, thriving, vibrant culture, or land of extreme brutalities and conflict. So what gets missed out in between is this, that Kohima is also, and places like Kohima, they are also kind of places where a lot of people are, kind of living their lives. It's a place of a lot of laughter, a lot of tear. So those kind of, so that beauty of everydayness. And it is something, I think, that reflects so sharply through your writings. And when you mentioned the whole issue of the war, the Second World War, in fact, your most celebrated work, Naga Village Remembered, which is, by the way, the first novel in English by an author from Nagaland. So that is the context. Just quickly for the audience, many of you might have, those of you who have visited Nagaland, might have heard of the name Konoma. Konoma is in fact historic on so many grounds. In fact, now it is part of the whole touristy map. It's one of the places where people are taken when people go to visit Kohima on that part of Nagaland. But Konoma history is very fascinating. It goes much beyond it. And the book is about, besides many things, it's about the war with the British. The British called it, in fact, their most formidable kind of battle in Northeast India when they were trying to establish their colony in Northeast India. So that very fascinating, that Konoma village walk is very fascinating. You can still see they are very good at stone and mason work. So they had this fort. There is still kind of a fortified village. Still some of the forts survive. So Konoma has this very long, illustrious history. And what I think you mentioned somewhere in one of the interviews, I remember, you said that you are basically chronicling the unwritten history. What you're writing is the unwritten history. So from that book and many other books, how do you see your writing as serving that purpose of filling up the void in history?
The thing is, village history is oral, and it's passed from one generation to the other. So it stays in the village, but it has never been written down, or it was never written down before, when was it, 2002, when I wrote my book.
Right.
And so when the historians, that's the old men, when they die out, the history dies. Each of them is a history book. So I was very concerned about that and started to write this historical novel, which is my first. And the stories are amazing because it was this little warrior village of about 500 warriors fighting the imperial power, and it was the last village resisting British power. And it's so interesting to find out what was historically happening, because they were at that point of time, that's 1878, they were sending troops to Afghanistan. And then they redirected those troops to Kunoma to fight this tiny little village. 2,000 troops came from Manipur, and elephants and guns, and we had only spears and a few homemade guns and rocks. So that was how it was fought, and we won.
Yeah, right. So this is very interesting, in fact. I mean, and there's like one could see, I mean, Konoma is also, the conflict actually goes on, and Konoma later becomes one of the very central kind of you can say, nerve center of the later Naga resistance. So one of the things which is, of course, not part of your writing, but which might be of a lot of curiosity and intrigue for the audience. If you visit Konoma, if you go on the way, the whole road is kind of, there are a lot of markers, and there is a very kind of a conscious and we can say, quote unquote, proud display of what people call Naga nationalism. So there are the memorials of the first president of Naga Union, Naga National Council, etc. So it is very interesting, that whole journey of that, the projection of nationalism and pride. And so from those type of writing, your writing, in fact, if we look at it, it's such diverse. That's another kind of a challenge to kind of have a conversation with somebody like you, because you are writing on so many genres. Of course, there are a lot of interconnections, but you also write, like, especially one of my favorite of yours is that When the River Sleeps. So that type of book, which talks a lot about the spirit world, it talks about dreams, it talks about importance of ecology in a larger sense. You have mentioned of magic stones, etc. So the importance of spirit world and the dream, which continues perhaps in books like The Son of Thundercloud, the spirit world. So there are different types of this type of book. So in the larger cosmology, right? I think these are reference to the larger kind of indigenous cosmology, or you can say Naga cosmology. So as an author, from that part of history, like books like Naga Village Remembered, which is one part of your writing, and this type of writing. So how do you look at it as separate, or you find some essential connections between different types, these different genres?
No, it's all connected, because when I went to the oral narrators in the village, they would give me the history, but they were so aware of the Naga spiritual universe. So they would also tell me spirit stories along with that. And even the American missionary who was posted in Kohima had some spirit encounters. Then I'll tell you later, afterwards, over a glass of wine.
Yeah, I think the audience would, of course, very much love to also hear it.
All right, I'll try to be brief. There was a young British soldier who was guarding the mission area, and every night he was troubled because a spirit would come, and first it would be normal size, but it would keep growing and growing, and it would really become huge. So the missionaries noticed that the boy was not happy, and he made inquiries, and the boy told the missionary, and then he said, "We'll wait together." And so the next night they waited together, and the spirit did come and began to grow and grow and grow. And then I think the missionary prayed or did something religious, and it disappeared. So this is one of our stories.
Mm-hmm.
But the war, in addition to our Naga spirits, the war left behind many spirits.
Right.
So I have a Punjabi classmate who recalls that one evening they were coming back late, and they looked towards the cemetery. That's the war memorial. And they saw white figures, tall white figures moving around. So there's just so many of those stories. You can't disregard it. And now they've become part of our spiritual universe. And I was exploring the Naga spiritual universe in When the River Sleeps,
Right.
with stories told me by my hunter friends.
This is very fascinating stories, of course. And about the war and the spirit you mentioned, I would like to also mention that, which I was telling you before, that my wife's grandmother, who comes from this village called Jakhama village, which was in fact the place where the Japanese army was stationed. And there's a village called Kigwema where the house is still there, where General Sato, who was commanding the division, the 10th Imperial Army Division, who was stationed, that house remarkably still stands. It is just like any other house. The Naga family is living in that house now. But you still meet the old people of the village. This person who actually used to cook food for General Sato. He was apparently very fond of the Naga herbs. So she's we'll know her, the wife of the pastor. And both of them are still around. And my grandmother of my wife actually can sing a bit of Japanese songs, because they were taught Japanese songs. And I have made a video once and posted it on YouTube and X. And interestingly, some Japanese people commented because they could recognize that song, and that was an old Imperial Army marching song of the Imperial Japan. So those really crazy, like this really fascinating connections that survives the whole kind of, the scale of time. And on the question of spirit again, one thing I would like to ask you, which is again very much kind of present in many of your tales, many of your narratives, is the whole animal, human, forest kind of continuum. How they are part of kind of one cosmology, one world, which sometimes is so kind of misconstrued or kind of completely missed out by the larger kind of the audience or by others. Because what we have seen even this time in Hornbill also, like there are so many very kind of exoticized kind of depiction of Nagaland as a place where everything is eaten. We have like tons of videos out on YouTube with really, really high number of views where they show how people are eating spiders, people are eating this, that, like, they exoticize and they find it very kind of something like that. But on the other hand, this whole kind of reciprocity, there's animals and humans and forests, like they are kind of one, that reflects on your book. So what kind of, has it changed over the years? Of course it has, but what kind of challenges there are with time? What kind of challenges have come? Right.
Kaustubh, I'm giving you a new name, Kaustubh. I need to tell them about this, that when I write about the spiritual universe of the Nagas, it's because my culture is about respect for life. So we are taught to respect human life, animal life, plant life, and also the spiritual. We are taught to try to live in harmony with the spiritual. That's why I feel it's very important to feature the spiritual in my books. And Hornbill is a constructed festival. It's not a real festival. So then there's been so much exoticization. It's almost like a design to primitivize the Nagas. And I really don't recommend that people should come and visit Nagaland during Hornbill Festival. Come at the other times and come to the villages, because that's where you'll see the real Nagaland. People are just so wonderful, hospitable. They'll give you everything they have, anything they have. Last week, We were driving in the country. Somebody gave us garlic. Somebody gave us wild apple wine, and that's how they are.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the real Nagaland, the spirit of hospitality.
Well, that might become the headlines tomorrow. Dr. Kire advises against visit to Hornbill. So but that will be interesting. Moving on from there, of course, like I said, she has so many dimensions. I mean, in her persona, like she is a poet. She, in fact, performs. She has her own jazz poet band based out of Norway, and she is also a very celebrated author who writes for children. Again, one of the pioneers in Nagaland and elsewhere. Shall we play the clip now, that poem, or after some time? Maybe this is the right time. We can just, shift the narrative. You want to read it first? Okay, sure. And you can also maybe share that Goa connection, how this poem came about. Right.
So I'd like to read a poem to you, which is a Margao poem. I just love Margao. And it's called Watching Goats. I'll try and find it. Yeah. Watching goats. It is sunset. I hear the bells, a faint tinkling that comes closer as I sit by the door and watch my neighbor lead his goats home, as he has done many evenings before. I came here to play witness, for it suits my spirit to see them go by, man and goats, the young ones leaping beside their mothers. Over the meadow they go. There is hope yet for the world when a man can lead his goats peacefully home. So I wrote that in Margao in the evening because it's such a lovely hour. We want to play to you a poem from this book. It's done an album which you'll find on YouTube, and YouTube and Spotify is called What If, and a jazz musician in Norway has made an album from 16 of my poems. So yeah, it's called What If. What if you rose one morning? You can dance if you want. And found that the sun was gone. What if you woke another morning? What if and found you couldn't hear? What if you rose one morning? What if and found that the sun was gone? What if you woke another morning? What if and found you couldn't hear?
What if you couldn't laugh? And what if you couldn't
What
sing?
if you couldn't sing?
Well, and what if you couldn't laugh? And what if you couldn't
What if you couldn't sing? What if you woke one morning?
What if you couldn't sing? Couldn't. What if that happens, I'll shine for you, and I'll let you live with me. I'll make you faces, and we will learn to sing with our hands. And I will always, always love you.
And did you just play it also for Valentine's Day? Because I will always, always love you. It ends like that. Wonderful, like lyric. Please check it up. It's online. It's What If You White, What If and Easterine Kire will be there. Nice.
I'm sure Doc Years, Leonard, I'm sure he can get it for you. So just get in touch with him.
Nice, thank you. And I really hope it kind of jazzed up the whole atmosphere. And on that note, I just, while before this you were mentioning about the poem on Margao and you were talking about the beautiful evening, I was just curious, like, was it in Goa that you saw the sea, the ocean first time? Or was it before that, before somewhere else? Because for somebody from Northeast, we know that our first encounter with the sea is always very fascinating because it is something so far from us. I remember when I was in school, I was visiting with some people and some of my classmates were requesting me to bring some seawater in some bottle. And I actually carried in a bottle some seawater because they were so fascinated to understand what is seawater and all that. So it is something always very remarkable encounter, the first encounter, because now we are very cut off. Again, historically we are not so cut off. Again, that was partly my yesterday's talk about this whole boundary making and how it divides people. Northeast had a good connection with sea at one point, especially Meghalaya had a thriving trade and all that. But now, of course, we are very much cut off. So what was your first encounter like with the sea? Not related to writing, but still.
I was 15 on a college tour, so it was Chennai. I'm so sorry it wasn't Goa.
Yeah, one loud clap came from there, yeah. So I would like to now talk a little bit about your writings for children. Because I think sometimes, of course, we call it children's writing and we want to compartmentalize, but I think some of the deepest message, some of the most profound things are actually there in children's writing. What is you enjoy writing for them, or you become one of them, and how do you write them, those type of writing?
My children's books, I have a big confession to make. I don't write for children, I write for the child in me. I let the child in me come out and play. And maybe we can show them this. Again, this is a Margao book. And this I wrote in 2023 because my little granddaughter likes stories, and I had to tell her this story. We made up this story, and I had to tell her the same story for 36 nights. So finally we decided, okay, let's make it into a book. And it happens in Margao, somewhere in a forest, of course. It's enchanted. And there are these long-nosed creatures, they're called the long-nongs. And disobedient little girls are in danger because they would entice them and eat them for dinner. So that's what the story is about. We had great fun making it.
I could see that, there are some very conscious, some kind of a purposive kind of writing, and it's almost like a useful tool for parenting, this type of books. So, and well, I mean, as somebody who has seen like the Kohima of course, in Mari is your one another remarkable book of Mari, where it's almost kind of, I think, it's semi-autobiographical also. Like, I mean, we have a lot of personal connection with that book. So a place like Kohima, which is really kind of from that situation, and it has gone through such changes, and many of you, maybe some of you have visited, you will know that it is now like any other modern city with a lot of fascinating history. You have all the young people are there, they're doing a lot of creative things. There are new cafes coming up every other day. So the history is, in fact, in a very interesting way, there's an unfolding of history. So in that situation, also because you have established a publication house at Bark Weavers, so you are, I think, one of those very conscious kind of, authors or people who are observing this change in the Naga life world. So what do you think is like some of the very nice, interesting areas that are coming up, and some at the same time some other areas where you think one should kind of pause and reflect? So both ways, good things and not so good things.
I think that the areas that have been untouched, and there are still some areas where you see old Kohima, those are the best places to be, because not many cars, and so there's no parking problem, and you can go for walks and still see the moon. So I would recommend that visitors should go there. But it's a town that I grew up with. It actually really grew from the 60s and 70s when I was a child and witnessing all that. So first there were schools but no colleges, and then there came a college and 2 and 3, and the population just exploded. That just really hurts my heart because it's not equipped for that. Yeah, but something that might be interesting is my grandfather's generation, they were very interested in education and getting their children educated. So my parents, my mother and her sisters, all of them went to school. School was really prioritized. And Kohima society has always been fashionable, even from my grandmother's time. We found poplin dresses in her trunks, beautiful flares, and from the 20s and 30s. So that was Kohima.
Right, and that continues to be Kohima, right? Fashionable and very forward-looking and thriving with a lot of ideas and different type of, activities. Another thing that really interests me, like more one gets to know of the Naga society, and which is something not many might kind of, fathom very easily, is that it's extremely diverse when it comes to languages. I mean, every village will have a language which is very kind of almost independent from the next village. Of course, there will be some commonality, but this richness. And so somebody like her, you're from Kohima village, right? Yeah, the Barabasti, like we call. So having maybe that one language from there, and then the common language, as they call of the Angam, is called Tenidi, which is again kind of a construct, meaning after the missionaries and translations of the Bible, etc. So that comes up as a common language. So still that, therefore, there are still a lot of limitations. There are still some words even not found in that language. And then, of course, English now. And Nagaland has its pidgin language called Nagamis, which helps people like me, because then that is the only language I can speak. So I can still speak to my in-laws and other people because of Nagamis. So there are this kind of plethora of languages, extreme diversity. So one can imagine somebody like Dr. Kire, when she writes, like how many kind of navigation, the mental landscape has to navigate through these 3 or 4 layers of different types of languages. So she mentioned somewhere, I think, that you write nativized English. Right. So can you kind of elaborate on that challenge?
I write in English, but it's not British English by any yard. I write what I call Tenidi English or nativized English, because my characters, they go to the fields, they don't go to school, they're certainly not speaking in English, but I translate their thought patterns into English. So you'll struggle a bit maybe when you first read my books, but it'll grow on you. And the thing about our connection with Assam, Kaustubh is from Assam, is Nagamese. The other day I heard somebody speaking Assamese and I could understand. And then I realized, oh, this person's from Assam, and a connection was immediately made. So it's so lovely. The same happens with Nepalese. A lot of us can speak Nepali of some sort. So it's such a wonderful thing to share languages or be able to speak the same language. And I know I didn't answer your question.
No, absolutely, you did. And that's the whole thing about it. I mean, one, of course, cannot have one answer to this type of a question. And I think it's also really empowers one as an author. I mean, having this kind of background of, coming from too many kind of languages and trying to kind of navigate through these layers. Well, in many of your interviews, I mean, what I've noticed, and also partly that you mentioned in your keynote speech also the other day, that you are not comfortable with this whole kind of bracketing of authors as authors from Northeast India, or like you are kind of in a silo as a women writer. So. But that is something that we see increasingly happening, right? I mean, of course, at some point, maybe people like us also are partly guilty of that, because I come from the Center for Northeast Studies in Jamia. I was there, one of the founding kind of faculty there. So this whole discourse of Northeast India studies, of course, in academics, it has its own kind of relevance and own kind of, you can say, validity. But you are right that we have seen that over the years. I mean, sometimes it also becomes superficial, right? And or sometimes it also becomes very stereotypical. It misses out the internal diversity that is there in Northeast India. I mean, if you put together a person from maybe a place like Sikkim and place like Nagaland and call both of them Northeast writers, just as Northeast writers from Northeast India, you miss out on so much of nuances. So what has been your experience regarding this?
I'll go back to the earlier part of your question, and I was going to blame the universities, and I realized, oh, you teach in university.
Excuse myself out of it, yeah.
But I used to also teach in university, so no. But something very sad with today's students is they've been encouraged to commodify writers and commodify books. If it's from the Northeast, it's about folklore, it's about this. And where are they getting those ideas from? They're getting it from the teachers. So I'll come with a stick. But it's very sad. We, as writers, we don't want to be commodified. We don't want to be labeled. I've tried to many times correct researchers who say that I'm an eco-feminist. What is that? I'm not a feminist. And just because there are trees in my books, that doesn't mean I'm eco-something that I'm is. So let's be more creative in research. And the other thing is, I'm still alive, so don't Google me. Email me, I'll give you the right answers.
On that note, because you're giving the opportunity of you don't want Googling, that this is the perfect forum there. People can ask you, who are you and what are you writing about? And we don't have I think we have about 8 to 10 minutes maybe. So I'll quickly open the floor for any comments, questions, any other things you would like to know from Dr. Kire, who's here. Please, most welcome.
The knowledge about Nagaland in rest of India looks very enigmatic, sort of. And we don't have authentic knowledge. It's mystified from both sides, perhaps, whatever. So would you like to actually talk about the basic thing about Nagaland which distincts it, and which is, as he said in the beginning, it's either a privatized or it's vilified, whatever. Could you please?
My answer would be, please come to Nagaland. Please, seriously, come and see it with your own eyes. And don't stop in the towns, come to the villages. That's where you'll see the real Nagaland. Because it's so easy for me to tell you, it's like this, it's like that, but you have to see it with your own eyes. And you'll be very welcome. So send us an email when you're coming.
And more questions are welcome, but I'll quickly add one thing to that. That recently, like in last 1 to maybe even less than 2 years, there is a sudden interest. A lot of the popular kind of web series, some of you might know Patal Lok, Family Man, they're all coming to Nagaland for some reason. And we're also very curious, what is this new, maybe like Indian kind of OTTs running out of plots, maybe, I don't know. Suddenly, they're well researched, but of course it has a lot of issues with that. I mean, that's a different story, different debate. But there is a sudden interest in Nagaland especially. And there is this whole, one of the plus good thing about it is that it's bringing up a lot of interesting local artists. Because Northeast India has a very thriving, I mean, of course that is a stereotype that rock capital of India, all that. But there are very interesting artists, mostly underground musicians, hip-hop artists. So they are getting, a good thing or bad thing, that's a different debate, but they are kind of getting a lot of limelight and people are recognizing them in that sense. So it's interesting times for, especially for Nagaland.
So what are your views on having a plot in the writing? Have you been asked that? I find it a painful question when someone asks, what am I writing about? Can I, do I have a plot in mind? And having read your books and devoured them, I wonder how you respond to those questions.
No, it's a nice question because I'm also a student of English literature, and from that angle I find plot useful. Just that my characters are very disobedient. They want to live their own lives. So the plot is there. I use it in theory, but in practice, everything just gets away from the writer, and they make it so much more interesting. Yeah, forget the plot.
Thank you very much for an interesting discussion here. I'd like to know, I know that you have lived now for quite a lot of time in northern Norway. Had that changed your perspective on your own writing, on the northeast of India in some way?
Yes and no. One is that distance gives objectivity. That's the change that I've experienced. And the other, sorry, I'm forgetting your question. Other things have not changed. I still value my stories, the stories of my people very much, and that's what I write out of. Things that other people have, things that people, when I was in India, have made less, made inferior. I find value in those now, and I'm trying to bring out those stories. Does that make any sense?
Yes, of course. I was thinking a little bit about your reflections here about being commodified as a northeastern writer, and I guess that kind of label is kind of meaningless in Norway. Then how are you labeled in Scandinavia?
I don't have labels in Scandinavia. I'm just a writer.
Labels, I mean.
Not even a woman writer, just a writer, and that's very nice. Yeah.
Thanks very much for a really stimulating discussion. My question is for both of you. It stems from the last exchange about academia. So in Goa, there's no way you can go to study Goan studies. It's not a field that exists. And I agree that academia itself can be a problem. It can define what a field is, and in the lack of definition, then leaves the door open. But in lieu of this, what space does exist within academia for Naga studies, if there's such a field to be coined, and beyond academia? What other ways might we think of engaging people who are Naga or Goan for that matter? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that interesting question. I'm not very sure about Naga studies as a discourse, but Northeast studies, of course, very much has now been almost there in many central universities, etc. There are areas to kind of study centers. I mean, this has come, I think, from kind of few different kind of locations. One, of course, was this whole kind of, idea that, Northeast as a category of resistance, because in different fields, in the field of art, in the field of academia, in the field of other kind of activities. So this was also done at a policy level, also as a policy discourse. So this can be read in different ways. It's partly a policy discourse, but partly a response to that very policy discourse also. So either ways, I mean, if you see the kind of background to different centers, all will be different. It's not the same. So that thing that what she was also mentioning, that over the course of time, maybe this whole generalization had become counterproductive in some sense. It was limiting the very objective it was kind of seeking to achieve in the first place. So that point of saturation might have come in some cases, but in some other cases where it's just starting, they're trying to kind of look for that vision of Northeast. That might be again a different story. So it's difficult to come out with one answer because it depends on the context, in what context we are talking about. But in certain contexts, it might be seen as a radical kind of a step. In certain other contexts, it might be part of the appropriation that we are talking about. So I will like to see it in that way. And when it comes to Naga studies, of course, there are a lot of scholars, and it is not within Northeast. I'm also using it in a very generic way within Northeast because it's become so normalized and acknowledging the problems with it. But Nagas and, in fact, Nagaland itself is a very contested kind of a subject, right? I mean, nowadays, who is a Naga itself? It's a very big question, very loaded question. It has a lot of different ramifications, different kind of, dynamics to it, but it's been studied for now a long time. Some of the early colonial anthropologists have also studied, so it's now very well studied. Kanato is here. I think you are kind of one of the votaries of the Naga studies. You can qualify to be, one of the Naga scholar, quote unquote Naga scholar. So although he also might resent having that label. So this is all about that. It's all about this politics of labeling and unlabeling. So I would see it like that. If you want to add something. I think she has already kind of spoken enough on this topic about labeling. So if there is more comments, questions, there is a hand there. Yeah.
So it's kind of an extension of your resistance to being thought of as a woman writer from the Northeast. It comes from space, but it's also, I have visited Nagaland, and very much the mainstream person reporting on an election going on in Nagaland was the capacity in which I went to some of the villages and saw some of the things. And I think it's mentioned a lot, and I'm sure you're used to this question, but I am still very curious. Why, and this is a very Nagaland specific question, I don't want to get into the generalization at all. It's when you move around there, women are so much in the forefront of everything. Academia, writers. I mean, the first Naga novel in English is written by a woman writer, and there isn't like a male writer who got there first, and then a woman writer catching up, and so on and so forth. And yet in politics, there is somehow a very clear chokehold that is very patriarchal. So I was just curious to know whether if you would want to comment on that.
No, I don't really want, but I'll call Kanato to the stage, and he can give you a beautiful answer. See, this is the beauty of not being a feminist. I can leave the monumental questions to the men. Come on. You're perfect.
No, I will, maybe I'll borrow your words only because I remember terrible matriarchy when you write, and one of the things you are perhaps, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you are talking about the empowerment that exists within Naga society for Naga women, and that the stereotype about how we understand patriarchy in other parts as a very linear way that might not be true all the time. I mean, there are, in the Naga context, there are a lot of examples of very sensitive and empathetic men. In fact, the terrible matriarchy is all about those kind of stories and those type of examples of, men really holding up, and how kind of, this empowerment, that whole idea of empowerment needs to be understood through very different kind of indigenous cultural perspective. Did I kind of summarize it okay? Or?
Yeah. No, you're very, very correct with that. Because it doesn't apply in the same way to Naga society as it applies elsewhere. And our men are actually very supportive of us in that book. That book closely follows reality, where the grandfather supports the young girl who wants to go to school and gives her treats and yeah. So I think I'm ready for lunch.
On that note, I thank all of you. I had a very delightful conversation with Dr. Kire. I hope all of us had very delightful conversation with Dr. Kire. Thank you so much, and please continue reading the books, engaging with Nagaland and engaging with her writing universe. Thank you so much.